Hi, I'm Vahid Razavi with BizCloud. I'm here with Anthony Scriffignano, the Senior Vice President of Worldwide Data and Insight at Dun & Bradstreet. Anthony, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us at Big Data Innovation Summit. It's a great privilege to get an opportunity to see you again. I wanted to follow up on our conversation from last time from Data Week. You're here at the Big Data Innovation Summit discussing some of the roles of big data in enterprise and IT. And I wanted to understand, what advice would you have around data governance, specifically for organizations that are new to big data, they're looking at big data to solve their challenges, and they're looking at how do I govern the information around the data that I get maybe from Dun & Bradstreet or other sources?
So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk again. It's great. Big question. And big landscape to answer a question like that. The biggest thing I would say around data governance is not to think of it as a requirement or something that you have to do within an organization. It's everyone's job. It's everyone's job to make sure that governance and compliance with the various regulations in the different parts of the world where you operate are being respected for very good reasons. Number one, because it's the law, but number two, because when you have that good practice and that good due diligence, it leads to all kinds of other great behaviors around the curation of data and the synthesis of data in an organization. So making sure that governance is everyone's responsibility, not just the team that might be charged with it, would be the biggest piece of advice. And then obviously there's different pieces of governance. There's statutory compliance, there's making sure that the information is accessible, there's understanding authentication and validation when it's being accessed. So you have to take it in different dimensions depending on what part of governance you're talking about.
I see. Well, when it comes to the old record managers of the past, their job has changed now. They're now data scientists. There are other people accessing the data. Could you talk a little about the changes that impacts both the record managers as well as maybe in the case of e-discovery on how those records have to be presented to court or have to be presented to third parties?
Sure. So two pieces of that question. One is the skills that we need to be able to even deal with this kind of information in this context are very, very different than they would have been in the past. So all of a sudden we have data scientists. All of a sudden we have people who have roles that are requiring that they understand how to deal with this massively connected enterprise that before might have been go to the finance department and get this information and go to the sales department and get that information. Now everything's connected to everything everywhere, but not really, because there's always going to be the information that kind of only exists in a little context of one particular department or one part of the enterprise or one group of people. So those people who are doing discovery, trying to understand where the data lives, it's not as simple as pushing a button or going and asking, please fill out this form and tell me what information you have. It's really understanding this massively connected enterprise and how do you get at the information in a way that, first of all, how do you know when you're done? And second of all, how do you know that you've gotten the information that you think you asked about, since everything tends to look like everything else at some level?
I see. And when it comes to the various silos in an organization that this data could be reposited, and it could also be retained for a long time, even though you might have retention policies, they could still be within those aspects of the organization. How do people authenticate the data that they have and they have retained to see if that data is still valid or not? I mean, as a business, as an enterprise, how do you validate your data a year or 2 years down the road to see if it still has value?
Yeah, so my first piece of advice would be that someone in your organization has a retention policy, probably your legal department. Listen to them. There are reasons for these policies existing, but they can't really make you do what they tell you to do in some cases. They can try to audit, they can issue the policies, they can ask you to sign off that you've read and understood those policies, but the actual doing, it's the same thing we were talking about governance, is that retention is really everyone's business. And now you get to the point where you have information that you have retained. Where does it live? There's copies of networks. There's copies of systems. Everyone walking around this convention has some sort of thumb drive or little thing that they can plug in and put information on. You can store information on your cell phone. So how do we know that we've gotten to all the copies of the information? And then, oh my gosh, what happens when it's different? Can we have a copy of an email on one device that's different than a copy of an email on another device? Actually, yes, because those devices are now filtering and altering the email to make it more presentable in the context of whatever the thing is that you're using. So it's a massively complicated question to know, did you get it all? Do you understand it? Should you save it? If you saved it, where did you save it? And then how do you get to it when you need it? Those are all very big questions.
And then when you get to it, is it still accurate? And I think that's the part that Dun & Bradstreet tries to solve for a lot of these businesses.
Yeah, accuracy is always a tricky problem. So we obviously have static data and dynamic data. We're collecting millions of updates a day to our database, and we're making those available to our customers so they can get the freshest possible data. Some of that data is very static. If you update the address of a business 12 times a day, you're probably not going to change it all that much unless they moved that day, right? But if you're looking at signals for trade, or if you're looking at other types of information that we might look like the pulse points of a business, you want to look at those at the right periodicity to make sure that you're getting the right opinion of what's going on. And so our job is to really assess the nature of the static data and the nature of the dynamic data and hit the right balance. And then you bring up the issue of accuracy. What does accuracy even mean in some cases? So we've got to have a standard of truth to compare it to. If we're creating the standard of the truth, that becomes problematic. So we've got processes in place to deal with all those tricky, nasty questions.
I see. Well, 176 years of collecting business data and being on top of big data before it was even big. Dun & Bradstreet has done a great job of that. I know you have a keynote to run to. The keynote is going to be online, and so we're going to make that available to our audience. But could you give us a little hint of what you're going to be talking about downstairs?
Sure. I'm going to be talking about obviously the convention here is about big data, but big data is just a term, right? So what does it really mean in the enterprise? In D&B, we're on this journey from data to insight to foresight to action. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, last time we talked about problem formulation. Now we're going to talk about, let me assume you've formulated the questions right, you understand what you're trying to ask, and we're trying to help you get an answer and work with you on that answer. What does the answer mean? What can you do with it? What are some of the new capabilities that are emerging to look at things multidimensionally, to look at things longitudinally, as opposed to in the past, please may I have some data? So very different journey with our customers, and everyone here has that journey going on in their enterprise. So we're going to try and talk a little bit about that.
Great. Well, Anthony, I'm going to let you run down to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
And looking forward to hearing the keynote.